Dear students, good morning. As you know, I was explaining the types of translation in the previous video. Now I am going to explain evolution of translation studies or development of translation studies. Translation studies has its own history. So development of translation studies there are many stages which we classify them as like this: in antiquity, in the Middle Ages, in the 15th century, in the 16th century, the 17th century, 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st century. Likewise, it goes on. First one, in antiquity. Antiquity means in ancient days. In ancient days, the translation of the Bible, which was originally written in Hebrew language, in the 3rd century BCE, Hebrew Bible, which was translated into Greek language in the 3rd century BC, is regarded as the first major translation in the Western world. This translation is known as Septuagint. It became the source text for the later translations. The debate relating to sense for sense translation versus word for word translation also has started around this time. There was a debate going on regarding translation, whether sense for sense translation is better or word for word translation is better during this time. And also, this Bible, as I told you, which was originally written in Hebrew language, later on in the 3rd century BCE, it was translated into Greek language. That translated Bible in Greek language, which is known as Septuagint. Later on, this Septuagint became the source text for the later translations. Bible has been translated into many languages. Then, during this time, Cicero, a translator from Greek to Latin language, he compared translator's work to that of an artist. He compared a translator to an artist. For him, translator is like an artist. So that all happens in the antiquity. And then in the Middle Ages, in the Middle Ages, Latin language was the lingua franca of the Western learned world throughout the Middle Ages. So as you know, today, English language, we can call it as a lingua franca. Lingua franca means link language or common language. Like that, during the Middle Ages, Latin language was the link language or the common language. And also, there were few translations of Latin works into vernacular languages. The first fine translations into English were produced by Geoffrey Chaucer in the 14th century. Chaucer translated French poem called, that is a Roman de la Rose. which was written by French writer Loris. The English title of that poem is The Romance of the Rose. Then the finest religious translation of that time was Wycliffe's Bible, named after John Wycliffe, who translated the Bible from Latin to English language. So John Wycliffe, he translated Bible from Latin language to English language during this time. Then in the 15th century, the great age of English prose translation began in the late 15th century with Thomas Malory's Laid Mort d'Arthur, which was written in 1485. Thomas Malory interpreted existing French and English stories in his work Laid Mort d'Arthur. English title of this work is The Death of Arthur. Arthur was the French king. So this was the prose translation which began in the 15th century. In the 16th century, what happens? England's Tudor poets and the Elizabethan translators adapted themes by Horace, Ovid, Petrarch, and modern Latin writers. During that time, the Tyndale New Testament, which was published in the year 1525, Tyndale New Testament is considered the first great Tudor translation, named after William Tyndale, who translated this. So from 1485 to 1603, which is called as Tudor period. So there were many poets in England and even many translators who used to adapt themes by classical writers like Horace, Ovid, and Petrarch, even the modern Latin writers. In the meanwhile, William Tyndale, he translated Bible, whose translated work, translated Bible came into existence, which is known as Tyndale New Testament. And later on, Martin Luther, you might have known him, who was the pioneer of Protestant Reformation movement. He translated Bible into German language, which is known as Luther Bible. So all this happens in the 16th century. And then in the 17th century, an English poet and translator called John Dryden, who sought to make Virgil speak. John Dryden translated the works of Virgil. Virgil was a Roman epic writer. His famous work was Aeneid. So here, during the time of 17th century, John Dryden translated the works of Virgil, Roman epic writer. During that time, faithfulness and transparency were better defined as dual ideals in translation. During that time, these two things, faithfulness and transparency, which are defined as dual ideals of translation. So these two things are very necessary, faithfulness and transparency. So while a translator translating any work, he has to be faithful to the original text. In the 18th century, throughout the 18th century, the watchword of translators was ease of writing. Whatever they did not understand in a text or thought might bore readers, they omitted. They cheerfully assumed that their own style of expression was the best. So it happens during the time of 18th century. The translators mainly focus on ease of writing. They did not try to translate everything. If they come across any difficulty in reading, they omitted it completely. And also, they thought that whatever style they have adopted, which is express style of expression, which is the best. And the Scottish historian Alexander Titler, he emphasized that assiduous or faithful reading. Faithful reading is more comprehensive guide to a language than the dictionaries. He emphasized the faithful reading. Scottish historian Alexander Titler emphasized that faithful reading is more comprehensive guide to a language. In the 19th century, the 19th century brought new standards for accuracy and style. German philosopher Friedrich Schleiermacher developed a theory called non-transparent translation theory. In his theory, non-transparent translation theory, he distinguished between translation methods that move the writer toward the reader, that is he called transparency, then the reader toward the writer, that is extreme fidelity or faithfulness to the foreignness of the source text. Here also we can see transparency and faithfulness. Those dual ideals of translation were emphasized by the German philosopher Friedrich in his theory, non-transparent translation theory. In the 20th century, George Louis Borges lectured on the art of translation, holding that a translation may improve upon the original. George Louis Borges, he gave a lecture on the art of translation. According to him, he told that A translation may improve upon the original. That is possible in translation. The second half of the 20th century saw the birth of a new discipline called translation studies. The term translation studies, which was coined by James Holmes, James Holmes, an American Dutch poet and translator, he coined the term called translation studies. In his work, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies, so during the second half of the 20th century. Then, in the 21st century, like their ancestors, contemporary translators have substantially helped to shape the languages into which they have translated. Translation studies is now an academic interdiscipline that includes many fields of study such as comparative literature, computer science, history, linguistics, philosophy, and semiotics. So, like with this, a lot of evolution, lot of development has been happened in the field of translation studies. Now, translation studies is interdiscipline. It includes many fields. Translation studies includes comparative literature, comparison of the text is possible, that is a comparative literature, computer science, because machine translation is going on. You can see how you can translate any sentence or word into many other different languages through Google Translation.